and gentlemen, welcome to the PGA Draftcast, brought to you by WinDailySports.com. Just a quick reminder that WinDaily Sports doesn't just cover golf. They cover the NFL, the NHL, MLB, NBA, soccer, MMA, NASCAR, you name the sport. WinDaily Sports has projection models, optimizers, articles, and our famous Discord chat to cover it all. Now, if you click the promo link below and you type in Win Big or Green, you will get 1 week free of WinDaily. And then after that, it is just $5.99 per week for all of that, including some of our betting content. Now, let's get to the PGA Draftcast, where we have proven track records with Joel, Spencer, David, and myself. Let's have some fun. Get in the chat. Make sure you subscribe to the page, and make sure you hit the like button. Let's do this snake draft. Let's do the PGA Draftcast. Let's do it right now.
Welcome in YouTube to the PGA Draftcast with a very special DP World Tour episode. We don't often head over to the ditch, but it is a breath of fresh air for the world's biggest tournament this week to be over the other side of the Atlantic on the DP World Tour, the BMW PGA Championship, with an absolutely stacked field. And we had to bring on the big guns with, for me, if I speak personally, my idol when it comes to golf betting, and also in terms of just his editorial skills and his article writing, always well worth a follow, Mr. Sir Ben Coley. How are you this evening?
Much better after that. Thank you. That's very generous. And it's good to speak to you as well, David. We've shared some nice chats over the last couple of years, and I know you've been banging in winners as well. So I'll hopefully keep up with you. But no, as you said, it's great that the BMW PGA Championship is in the spotlight. I think, in years to come, we could see it develop into something even more than it is today. And I hope we'll see some of the very best Americans join Billy Horschel in playing in years to come. But right now, we've got all 12 members of that European Ryder Cup team. So it's a fantastic event, a great way to continue the biggest month of the year in golf for me. I don't think it gets much better than this.
Absolutely, and just even bigger things around the corner, right? We've got the French Open next week, pretty quirky, fun course to follow there, and then right into it with the Ryder Cup as well, which I know that you and I have spoken about and speculated on, and been looking forward to for quite some time, and that's just around the corner, so that's incredibly exciting. Touching on the Ryder Cup, that European team, I know that you and I perhaps took different views on a particular Sepp striker. Now that Nicolai Højgaard has made the team, how are you feeling about Sepp making the squad?
Yeah, look, that was kind of, I was planning alone for it with that. I think it's very hard to deny the fact that he earned his selection. I think my worry with him is that he earned it with a very sudden burst of form. And I suppose it's a different thing, trying to work out who has done enough to earn selection and who you'd be confident will deliver. And I would just have that doubt that if you get Sepp on a bad week, and I think a lot of people are talking about Robert McIntyre as the European player with perhaps, shall we say, the lowest floor. I actually think Sepp might have the lowest floor. So that would be my big worry around a course that I don't necessarily think suits him. But look, I'm not complaining. I got my Nicolai. He's there. I'm really excited about this team. I am. I think they're going to. I think it's a team that you can look at from a European perspective. And I'm not a particularly patriotic person, but when it comes to the Ryder Cup, I'll have the blue paint with the gold stars, and I become very patriotic about Europe. And I do think whatever happens in this Ryder Cup, first and foremost, I don't think Europe will be disgraced as they kind of were in America 2 years ago. But secondly, as well, there'll be players in there who are playing 5 or 6 Ryder Cups over the next 12 to 15 years who will learn a lot from this experience. And they get to make their Ryder Cup debuts alongside people like Rory McIlroy, and with a former world number 1 European as captain. It's a pretty good gig. And I know they relish that role as underdogs as well. So I don't think it could be set up much better, to be honest with you, for a fabulous Ryder Cup in a couple of weeks.
Absolutely. And I think that if you'd asked me, 6 to 8 months ago, I would have been leaning the other way to what I am now. It does feel like the European golfers are the ones rounding into form at the moment. I mean, you look at the top of the board, and it just looks incredibly competitive for those first sort of 8 names. And then guys like Sepp Striker, for example, I mean, yes, he's got an incredibly low floor, and I agree with you totally on that, but I also feel like he's got an incredibly high ceiling if he can just go out and make 8 birdies for you. And I think for the European side, what Luke Donald wants to see from someone like Sepp Striker is, does he come out on, his singles round, shoot a 62 that day, and suddenly steal a point that they're not expecting to kind of get away with? And that could be the turning point for them. Not so sure that Marco Simone is the best fit for Sepp Striker, and I probably would have preferred like an Adrian Meronk in there, just in terms of the course fit and style. And I'm sure Dodo, running his numbers, would have found the same thing. But I think, I agree. Sepp is just incredibly hard to leave out. And if you're looking for a player who's got that high upside, he kind of ticks that box for me. Then on the American side, guys like Justin Thomas making the squad. I suspected he was always going to kind of be there unless someone went and absolutely claimed that spot, and it didn't feel really like anybody did. I guess Keegan Bradley would have been the closest and probably the one who can feel the most aggrieved, perhaps rightly so, that he isn't in that team. I mean, what did you make of the choices there from Zach Johnson on the American side?
Yeah, very difficult. I think very similar, I suppose, to Europe, albeit with a different sort of set of players, different style of player. I think as far as Europe goes, I agree with you about Adrian, and I think he's unlucky. I think we'd all say that. I'd also say that Europe probably has enough of that type of player, and so one of the potential benefits of a player like Sepp Striker is that he does give you something different, perhaps someone to find a few fairways in a 4-balls match where someone else goes after those drivable par 4s, for instance, which we'll see. Marco Simone, as far as the American side goes, I did waver a lot with JT, but I pretty much agree with what you're saying. The playoffs were there. You had people like Tony Finau, Cameron Young, who is entitled to feel a bit annoyed that he was sort of half told he was going to be in the team, but ultimately they didn't play well enough. Following the Open Championship, when of course Cam Young did play very well. And it allowed Zach Johnson to go back to JT. And I think hearing from Johnson since, he probably didn't have as much doubt as people like us may have done. But I do think in some strange way, Justin Thomas not playing in the playoffs helped him. Because if he goes to Southwind and he, finds one or two of those various ponds and all of a sudden finishes, 65th in that field of 70, and let's say he finished a bit higher and he did somehow progress to the BMW Championship, then he finishes 45th in that. It's very, very difficult to accept a sustained run of poor form. And actually, instead, what we had was that closing image of Justin Thomas very nearly chipping in to make the playoffs. And in some ways, I think actually that was the perfect ending for him. But maybe I'm too romantic. And the bottom line is, I think Zach Johnson, he said it himself, you don't leave JT at home. I think there was a circumstance where you do, but it definitely required more. And it required more from different people. And with the greatest of respect to Lucas Glover, who deserves a lot of credit for what he did, had that been Tony Finau winning back-to-back, we'd have had a very different conversation.
Yeah, completely agree with that. I mean, Tony Finau was the baffling one for me. I would have thought that beginning of the year, he would have been one of the first sort of 6 names that I would have put on that team sheet, and then he just really crumbled over the summer, unfortunately. And saw someone like Lucas Glover get hot. It would have raised the question of, he's hot now. Is he going to be hot in 6 weeks' time when he kind of needs to be? And that would have been the concern on that side. And completely agree on the Justin Thomas take, and I like the angle that you come at it with that perhaps playing less would have benefited him in the long run. On the flip side, I think Adrian Meronk, if he'd remained in Europe, actually could have automatically qualified quite easily in the end, and he's probably kicking himself considering he more than likely is going to earn that PGA Tour card automatically anyway by the end of this DP World Tour season. In the meantime, that's in a fortnight. This week, we've got a huge tournament at Wentworth with a massive field. Very exciting to see all of the European Ryder Cup team. I was wondering, Ben, if you could take us through the course a little bit and what your observations are of Wentworth, what sort of golfer it's going to suit, and any sort of comp courses that you use in your analysis here.
Well, the main thing to say about Wentworth, obviously, it's been redesigned controversially about 13 or 14 years ago, and that process got repeated and repeated until they ended up with something they're pretty happy with. It's not a difficult course, particularly now. I know a lot of players, they wouldn't necessarily say that. I think all the players at the top of this market would say, oh, no, Wentworth's tough. If you're not on your game, you can do this, that, and the other. But it gives you a lot of opportunities. There are not a great deal of long holes here. 4 reachable par 5s. I mean, it closes almost uniquely with 2 par 5s, the 17th and 18th. I know 17, you've got to hit a very, very good drive to a very precise bit of the hill on the left to have a chance of running it up on the green, but it is doable. Certainly there are eagle opportunities on all 4 par 5s. The 4th and the 12th really are par 4s. And you've got to make your score around those holes. There are, a set of difficult par 3s, but again, they're not long irons for these guys nowadays. I mean, they're quite short par 3s. You think the second, we generally see someone go very close to a hole in one, the 10th as well, which feeds into the middle of a sort of typically quite small green. And it's very difficult if someone asks you about Wentworth, like, what are the holes where things can go badly wrong? And actually, there aren't that many. There is some out of bounds, the 9th, the 15th, they can test a player, but it's a course where you can score. And we saw it last year, albeit, yes, the course was very soft and softer than it will be this time, but we saw a couple of 62s, and whether or not we'll get that low this year, I don't know, but it's a fun golf course. I think it's probably proof that not every golf course has to be really difficult to host a world-class event. And certainly, obviously, for me and for anyone who grew up in Europe, but also, as we've heard from Horschel and various others, it's an event that really resonates. This is a golf course that hosted this event since the 80s, but also the World Match Play as it was throughout the 90s and early 2000s. And my earliest memories watching golf are watching Wentworth. So it's a course with real history, and that's very, very difficult to replicate. But above all else, yeah, I'd say it's a course where you don't necessarily run into a lot of trouble, but it will test everything about your game. It will ask you to hit a lot of different shots. You don't have to hit that many drivers, but when you do need to hit driver, you've got to hit it well. 9 and 15, probably 2 of the better examples, even though we've seen a bit more clubbing down over the years there. But if you miss greens, they are small. Scrambling is not easy. Fairways aren't that easy to find, but again, you're hitting long irons and 3-woods to a lot of them. So yeah, if you're on your game, you can score. If you're not, it'll make you look a bit silly. I think it's a really good test for this event. I think it's improved for being made a bit easier in some ways. And listen, in the last few years, we had a massive shock here in 2010 when Simon Khan won. We've had a couple of almost shocks since, and Ben An, when he won as a rookie, was a fairly big price. But in recent years, now that the course is quote unquote fairer, I don't necessarily think fair is the best word to use in golf sometimes, but it's produced a high class roll of honor, and I find it difficult to imagine that changing this week.
Yeah, I mean, look at when the field is as stacked as it is. I mean, it's always a strong field on the DP World Tour. I mean, it's essentially the equivalent of the Players Championship for the DP World Tour. It's that sort of caliber. But with the field this year, with the Ryder Cup on the just around the corner in Rome, it does feel like it's very likely to go towards the top of the board. I guess for me, like a -18 to a -22, somewhere where I see the winning score sitting around that range, maybe a bit lower if someone gets really hot, but I believe it's been quite dry and firm. You'll know better than me, being on the ground there in the UK. So I wonder if that perhaps makes some of those sloping fairways just a little bit more difficult to hold in certain spots, and you see a bit of run out into some of those that thick rough around Wentworth as well. And then in terms of comparison courses, I know that you spoke in your article about Woburn. Mataiga for me came up quite a bit in terms of, the Kenyan Open, Park Lane kind of tree-lined course. Obviously got the altitude there, always comes into play. Potentially Brabazon, Belfry, again, narrower kind of test and not necessarily the longest course, but it's going to put a lot of pressure on your approach game, smallish greens, water in play and hazards in play as well. Anything else that you'd add to that list there, Ben?
Yeah, I think the Brabazon's a really good one. And I think as well, actually, they don't go there a lot, so we can't say with any real certainty. But I think last week at the K Club's a really good way to prepare for Wentworth. Again, it was probably a bit softer than they'd hoped for at the K Club. And I think the rough probably a bit thicker than we'll get at Wentworth. It's quite rare actually at Wentworth to see people doing as they were at the K Club at times and sort of hacking out of the rough. And I was quite surprised to see that myself actually. And it's probably what kept a lid on scoring in the Irish Open in the end. So slightly different in some ways, but I think, yeah, these sort of classical Parkland tests, a couple of good courses potentially in places like Belgium. So a lot of Harry Colt's work can be seen there in Belgium. A lot of people who've taken inspiration from him, and the Netherlands as well. But Belgium in particular, I would think of courses like Rinkelen, which we've seen host the Belgian Knockout, and then more recently the Soudal Open. Now, obviously, the problem with these is that seldom are the best players involved in these fields. So, yeah, they might help you fill out a DraftKings lineup. They might give you that little clue there. But Rory McIlroy has not yet played in the Soudal Open, and I don't imagine that'll change anytime soon.
No, I think, everyone in Belgium would be flocking to the Soudal Open, where Rory McIlroy suddenly headlining that contest. But yes, another fantastic example, finding fairways, but a lot of tree-lined parkland kind of style courses, I think, is where I'm looking for the guidance. But it does look to be an all-round test of the game. We're going to bring up the draft board and get into this draft. So if you're new to the PGA Draftcast, the way this works is standard snake style draft. You've got your DraftKings salary, so 50K is the maximum you can spend. You can't just go and get all the best golfers. Once a golfer's off the board, you can't take him again. I have gone ahead and given Ben Coley the first tip, and I think I know perhaps where that's going to go. So I will bring up the draft board now, and as I do, also a big congratulations, Ben, on the win last week. I'll just resize this. Big congratulations on last week with Vincent Norman, obviously coming through for you. He was within our tips as well, along with Ryan Fox. So it's always nice to get a bit of a winner to start the season.
And look, a great example of, and it's something I try and hammer home, and I'm not alone in that, but the PGA Tour, as much as I love the DP World Tour, it's my favorite golf tour. If I could only watch one tour, I would watch the DP World Tour without question. But the PGA Tour is so much deeper. The talent pool is so much deeper. And when a player like Vincent Norman, who spent all year playing on the PGA Tour and winning, comes over to the DP World Tour, you have to give them enormous respect. And we've seen it. Every tournament since the DP World Tour came back could have been won by a player returning. You know, Matt Wallace was really unlucky not to win, I thought, in the Czech Masters. And then, of course, we had Ludwig Aberg. It could so easily have been Nikolai Højgaard in any one of those two events. And then last week, Vincent Norman, but also Ryan Fox, who spent most of this year on the PGA Tour as well. So I think it's just worth stressing again. And there'll be players in this field who fit that criteria, and I think you have to give them enormous respect.
Absolutely, yeah, it is still a big drop down, isn't it, from the PGA Tour to the DP Tour? And Matt Wallace, I think, is a perfect example because he did the similar thing last year. He was in dreadful form, missing tons of cuts, and then pops back over to I think it might have been the KLM Open or the Porsche European Open. I can't quite recall, but and he finished sort of top 5 just instantly as soon as he stepped back down. So, in saying that, Ben Coley, the first pick of the PGA Draftcast for the BMW PGA Championship is yours. Who are you going with?
I'm going to go with Jon Rahm, who is my headline bet this week as well. I think I understand the reasons people would sort of rank him third this week behind Rory McIlroy and Victor Hovland. I know a lot of people would look at DraftKings and think, Hovland at what, $500 less is better value. But I think Rahm is just a phenomenal big fish in small pond. I think he's so good, and some players don't always. It doesn't always work quite as straightforwardly as it has with him. And he's won 8 times in 23 non-major starts on the DP World Tour. It's just a phenomenal return. And I know that a lot of those have been in weaker fields than this, but at least 3 and probably 5 of them have been in comparable fields to this. And then you throw in the fact that he's been runner-up in both his Wentworth appearances. He's the halfway leader on debut. And then last year he stormed through the field on Sunday and thought he might have won it, but was done by Shane Lowry, of course, in the end. So he comes into this off a quiet playoffs, but that's also something I don't really mind, because I think after a long year, a new year where, they've been playing these designated or elevated or now signature events, we're supposed to call them, players are getting to grips with new schedules and dealing with a whole lot of stuff. And that's before you throw in the fact that he became Masters champion. It will have been massively exhausting for him, I think. And he probably just ran out of gas a little bit after finishing second in the Open. And I just think after a couple of weeks off, he should be raring to go. It's such a good golf course for him. And ultimately, he's John Rahm, right? So probably didn't need to say much more than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just to, I guess, reiterate his record, not just when it comes to the DP Tour, but particularly the Rolex Series events. He's been basically a stud when it comes to these bigger events on the DP Tour. He kind of comes over and gets the job done in these larger events. So no complaints whatsoever about the pick. Obviously, having read your fantastic article, which you can find over on Sporting Life, is always worth a read. As I said at the beginning of the show, in my personal opinion, Ben Coley is the absolute goat of golf content, just in terms of his writing style as well. It's always fantastic reading and one of the sharpest in the market. So do head over there if you get a chance. With my first selection on the Draftcast, I'm gonna skip across the top three and actually go down to Tommy Fleetwood for me at 10,200. I think Tommy's just right on the precipice of victory. We've seen him do very well in these tournaments towards the end of the year previously. The NetBank Challenge last year, for example, when he stepped back to the DP World Tour, came out and won there. Again, smaller field, but a pretty high-class field in that. His ball striking is always excellent, and he just seems to be rounding into a bit of form. And the question for me with Tommy comes in that he's seemed to struggle when it comes to Sundays on the PGA Tour. He does seem a lot more comfortable when it comes to the DP World Tour and that step back in form in terms of the class of the field. And of course, there's the headliners here, but I do wonder whether there's an element of comfort that comes to this sort of course with Tommy Fleetwood. He tends to win at around this, minus 18 to minus 22 kind of mark is quite often where his victories come on these more difficult sort of courses. And I just wonder if with the Ryder Cup around the corner, he's wanting to cement his place in some of those starting four balls and foursomes and show a bit of form coming into Luke Donald so that we make sure that he's rounding out through in as many matches as possible. Ben Coley, any thoughts on Tommy Fleetwood?
Yeah, I love Tommy. In my betting preview, which obviously is a slightly different conversation, I thought him and Matt Fitzpatrick were quite rightly considered the big threats to the big three. He came here last year, I think, probably just for a bit of context as well. He was the first round leader last year and then emptied out, but it was his first start in 2 months after his mother had passed away. And I think coming back to Wentworth, knowing that that's where he returned to action last year, knowing that he has that 64 behind him and that really it's a course that he's threatened to win at a couple of times. It would be a really nice way to round off what's been his best year in 4 or 5 years, really. And as you said, in terms of the Ryder Cup, I mean, one of the things I sometimes forget, and I've been obviously doing a lot of prep work for the Ryder Cup the last few days, he really wasn't a significant player for Europe in 2021 because he hadn't had a great year. And if you compare that to 2018 when he was, one half of such a brilliant partnership with Francesco, then I'm sure he'll be eager to show his worth again. And really, he should be a stalwart of the team this year. And why not on the back of a massive win? And the final thing I'll say is that actually he gets a bit of stick for not winning as often as people think he might. But you look at his strike rate over his last 60, 70 events at this level, he's winning at about 1 in 12. Well, I'm sorry, but outside the elite, that is absolutely outstanding. It's comparable with Matt Fitzpatrick. I think actually it's a little bit better than Fitz in DP World Tour events. Tyrrell Hatton, who people, 2 years ago, people would say, oh, Tyrrell wins, Tommy doesn't. Well, Tyrrell's not won in 2.5 years now. So I think these things are fairly fluid. They depend on a lot of small factors, a lot of things going right. And Tommy is more than capable of winning a tournament like this. So, yeah, I wouldn't put anybody off.
Absolutely, yeah, and especially at that DP World Tour level, he is pretty prolific, and I guess that's why it's been battling. He hasn't got the maiden win on the PGA Tour just yet, is because on the DP World Tour, we're so used to see him slam the door shut when it comes to Sunday, right? And we just haven't seen that on the PGA Tour yet. But it's a great course with, he's had some great history at, and should fit his game really, really well. Team Audience has already nominated Tom Kim with their first selection, snatching him out from under my feet because he would have been my follow-up pick on the turnaround. So well done, Audience. You've got one over me there. And it looks like the second selection after your comments about Tyrrell Hatton is to back that up and take him from you there as well. So any thoughts and any preference between those two selections there, Ben?
I was on the DP World Tour podcast earlier today, and my colleague and friend Matt Cooper made a very strong case for Tom Kim, who, of course, has played a lot of good golf in the UK from limited opportunities. And you think on paper, this is a really good course for him because it is a course that can't really be overpowered. There aren't a lot of holes where you can cut a corner or you can, where Rory McIlroy can take out his driver and fly a bunker that people otherwise cannot fly. There are a couple of opportunities to do that, but really not many. So Tom Kim, every chance. As far as Tyrrell goes, I think we probably all have expected him to come over and be a big factor in this event. Obviously, a winner, 3 years ago now? Or is it 2? I don't know. No, 3, of course. And it was a bit disappointing how he played last week, but it was just one round of golf, really. He was better on Friday. And he has had a really, really good year on the PGA Tour. We all know that, in the sort of base stats, he was not far off the top 3 there. So no surprise if he were to win this event again. It is one where we've seen a number of multiple champions. And again, a bit like Tom Kim, right? I know Tyrrell's added a bit of yardage, but essentially he hits a really straight ball. That works here. So no reason he can't go well.
Yeah, Tom Kim as well is just quietly. I mean, he's still very young, but he is adding distance, and I think that's been one critique is Tom Kim's short, but the guy's in his early 20s. He's still developing and growing, and he is gaining a bit of distance to go along with that accuracy. The appeal for me with Tom Kim is just the short game is so excellent, and the putters can just really fire up. And on this type of course where eventually you are going to miss greens, you are going to miss fairways, you're going to have to scramble and you're going to have to make some putts. And I've got every confidence that Tom Kim's got the ability to do that when he does get onto the flat surface. So on the turnaround, would have very much liked to have taken Tom Kim here. Well done, audience. You've stolen that from underneath me. So I'll go instead further down the board with a bit of value, but a player who, in terms of our comp courses that we spoke at the beginning of the show, ticks a lot of boxes for me, is Julian Bruin at 7,100. So he's turned into some decent form with the irons the last 3 tournaments, gaining multiple strokes on approach. 54th at the Scottish Open, not much to say there, but 25th at the Czech Masters, then 16th last week at the K Club. As Ben mentioned, I don't think that's the worst guide, as well as being a guidance in terms of your recent form. Then we look at some of those correlated courses. So Ringfin at Soudal Open earlier this year, he was 15th. Mataiga, he's had a 13th and 7th in 2 appearances there at the Kenya Open, and then a 13th at the French Open last year as well, which I don't think Le Golf National is the worst comp course for here. So just looks to be striping it beautifully. The approach game is really turning around, gaining a bit on accuracy as well last week, and I suspect he'll make the cut, which for 7,100 is what I kind of want.
Yeah, I looked at Julian Brun this week, actually, for all the reasons you said. I think if you were to sort of put one of the, what are they, spider diagrams or whatever of his game, it would look very, very similar, but not as good to a player like Luke Donald, who, of course, had a great record here back in the day, and someone like Alex Bjork as well. He's crooked off the tee. He did say last week that his driver felt better, which is encouraging. And he seems to be improving with the week, and by the week rather, and he's a player I've always had a bit of time for. So, yeah. Julian Brun was about 200 to 1 over here. And, I thought he was one of the more interesting outsiders, that's for sure.
Yeah, and spoiler alert for anyone who isn't a member of WinDaily Sports, if you do want to join, just jump over to my Twitter at Deep Dive Golf. But he did make my card this week at, I think I put him up at 180 to 1, which you can find at William Hill with 8 places, which I, particularly with 8 places, is very, very generous. And then I like him in the top 20 and top 40 markets this week as well. Ben, 2 selections for you on the turnaround here. Where would you like to spend those dollars?
First of all, I'm going to go with Billy Horschel, who I think, for 8,500, you look at the golfers he's sort of surrounded by. I think he's good value. I thought he was kind of a little bit shorter than I wanted to be taking in the outright market this week, because having put him up last week in Ireland in a weaker field, to go in again at sort of the same, if not slightly shorter odds, felt like it was asking a little bit too much. But at the price he's pitched in at, sort of around Sepp Straka or Aaron Rai and Alex Bjork, beneath Vincent Norman and Adrian Moronk. I think he deserves to be higher up there. I'm sure he'd be very popular for that reason. So, I don't think you're going to get a big edge in terms of ownership projection there, but I think he's set for a very good week. I mean, it's easy to forget that he was 12 under with 15 holes to play or 12 holes to play at the K Club. If he plays the remaining 15 or so in 2 under, he's right there on the winning score. So he's one of those who played a lot better than his final results. And stats wise, I mean, for the first 2 days, he absolutely striped it. Not so good on Sunday. He wasn't the only one. It was a really strange Sunday, as we've discussed. And really, the short game was the thing that let him down the most. His chipping was not great. In fact, it was decidedly poor. But if we can get a better week there, he's a player I like a lot in terms of DraftKings this week. As I say, he wasn't quite a big enough price. I'd have wanted sort of 40, 50 to 1 maybe. But that's kind of what he translates to here on DraftKings, and I thought it was exceptional value. So I'll go with Billy Horschel first of all, and I get another pick, right? I get to go straight in again.
You do, yeah, absolutely, back to back.
Right, I'm going to take Francesco Molinari, and I'm scrolling to find him. I understand that there are some concerns about Molinari this week. You'll have to tell me where he is because I can't see him anywhere. But there we go. He's at 7,004. There we go. So. Look, it's almost a little bit too cute, isn't it? The course specialist, he's got a better record here than anybody. I think if you look out for Justin Ray tweeting in the next sort of 48 hours about Francesco's record at the West Course, it is utterly phenomenal. He's a winner in 2018. He has 6 other top 10s in his last 10 appearances. And 2018 was the year he went on to win the Open. He was a better golfer then than he is today. But again, I come back to that point around people who are playing mostly on the PGA Tour and what happens when they come back. And we go back to the start of the year. I was actually on Francesco as a 50 to 1 shot in Abu Dhabi at Yas Links, where he led going into the final round. He played really, really well in the Hero Cup the week before that. And I believed very briefly that this could be a sort of renaissance year for him that might even end with a Ryder Cup place. Now, obviously, he's there instead as a vice captain, but I think he's still got plenty of game. And if you go back to the Czech Masters, which is not as suitable a course as this one, nothing like it, he posted a couple of 67s through the middle of the tournament, 10 under for his Friday and Saturday rounds. He didn't make a great deal of putts. His approach play was as good as it's been since January. He drove the ball well. And if he's going to come alive again, why not at Wentworth, where last year he finished 9th and he hadn't played for 2 months. So he can go around here blindfold. And I'm pretty hopeful that he can surprise a few people this week, top 20, maybe even top 10. And it wouldn't shock me entirely if he's right in there in the mix.
I mean, you absolutely baffle me, Ben, in terms of your knowledge and your ability to just retain that information. I don't know how you do it. I get accused at WinDaily Sports of being a time traveler and owning a DeLorean when my successful tipping comes in. But if I'm Marty McFly, you were certainly the Doc Brown of golf tipping. So, absolutely phenomenal. Look, and interesting here at Wentworth, right? You do get some pretty sticky course history. Like, it does seem a place that once you find for me, you found the way to plot your way around this course that you can retain that. And both Billy Hohen and Francesco Molinari tick those boxes in spade. Particularly Billy Horschel is just phenomenal when it comes to this course. And I don't know whether it's just his love for West Ham or the course itself, but he does love getting over to the UK and tends to play very well. So no complaints with either of those picks for me. I am going to go someone actually who is also on the Ryder Cup team, also like Tommy Fleetwood, probably wants to prove himself and make sure that he's going in with some decent form and make sure he's getting into as many games as possible, which would be Justin Rose, who I think within his price bracket is probably going to get missed quite a bit. I know Tom Kim's going to be very popular just above him. I think Nicola Hojgaard's going to attract some attention. Adrian Moronk's right there as well. And I think Justin Rose is likely the one in that range who gets missed. He has got a very, very good record here. We've seen it previously. He's finished 6th, 8th, 12th, 25th, 9th. He's had a runner-up in 2012 and a 10th in 2010 as well. And he looks to be riding into bit of decent form. He had a decent playoffs. He didn't make the Tour Championship, but 20th at the St. Jude and then 22nd at the BMW Championship as well. Looked to be finding his game a little bit more coming into Ryder Cup season. And as I said, I just think he sort of gets missed there, and he does have the upside returning back to home soil. We haven't seen him for a little bit as well, so that's perhaps promising if you don't really know where his game is. So I always like to take kind of a flyer on something like that, where he could very well have been striping it on the driving range, and the Czech Republic are not going to be none the wiser. Any thoughts?
I like Rose. Yeah, I mean, it's 33-1 here. You have to look twice at that. I mean, he, once upon a time, went off favourite for this. I was a bit disappointed with him at the British Masters, and I know that's harsh. I tend not to criticise players when they finish sort of the top five, and it's an extraordinarily hard thing to do. But I was on him that week as favourite. I thought he would go and stamp his class in that event, and he just made one too many mistakes, and he did the same in Canada. And I have my doubts about him going and winning a big event like this at the moment, which will seem harsh, especially as he, obviously won at Pebble Beach back in the spring and has achieved pretty much everything there is to achieve in this game. But I'm fascinated by his Ryder Cup role as well, just on that, because historically he's been a phenomenal foursomes player. I think he's won 7 out of 10 matches in foursomes. Would you pick him for a foursomes with the squad you've got at the moment? Probably not. And maybe he does need to go and convince Luke Donald to do that with his performance here. But he's moved back to England. He'll be, he's someone who cares deeply about his legacy in the game. And I think if you asked him realistically, obviously he wants to win another major. I think the Masters will be top of his list, actually, ahead of the Open. But actually, in a sort of more realistic level, this would be a really nice thing to add to the CV before he retires, because he's certainly gone close to winning it before.
Absolutely, yeah, he does look like he's rounding into a bit of form this year. Obviously, he's was desperately upset with the Ryder Cup last time, and dead keen to be back. And I wonder as well, like he seems like he's almost going to be the locker room guy. There's not a hell of a lot of experience on this European side. I'm sure that he is desperate to be out there and playing as many matches as he possibly can. And I think this is the kind of week where he can go and stamp his authority and perhaps put it out there and convince Luke Donald he needs to be rolled out a little bit more than he would be if he doesn't play well this week. So a couple of nominations in the chat. Just a reminder, everyone, you can check your names in the chat. You're drafting against myself and Ben as well. You've got your own team. Once a golfer is named, if they get a second nomination, that is your selection. So far we've got Zanotti, Sharma, Victor Perez. We just need a second on one of those. James, I'm not sure if that's a tip on Victor Hovland or if that's a official selection for you from the audience as well. Ben, while we're waiting for that, this Ryder Cup, obviously we spoke pretty extensively over the last year, as we do in our chats, about what the likely selections were going to be. And within WinDaily, we actually put up Europe at $3.10, and now they've moved into kind of like a, plus $1.25, $2.25 kind of range, which for me feels about fair. But if you were, brand new walking into the market now, would you be placing a bet on either side, or are you just kind of a wait and see where things lay kind of after a couple of days?
No, probably not, to be honest. I mean, it doesn't massively interest me in a pure, the outright market doesn't massively interest me as a betting medium most years. I think it's easy to say now, but hopefully people have picked up on other podcasts I've been on and things I've written. I do think, if you were getting 2-1 Europe a month or so ago, you were on the right side of it. I think they'll probably go off sort of 11-8, 6-4. So plus 250 in your language. And that would be about right. They have to be underdogs even on home soil. But I wouldn't entertain back in the US odds on, that's for sure. As ever, I think there'll be loads of interesting opportunities in other markets, including not just scorers, but actually a couple of years ago over here, bookmakers were offering prices on pairings and everything. And if we can get that again, I mean, they might have been stung by that last time, but hopefully a few of them go in again with that, because I think the best markets are always the ones where you're pitting your opinion against someone else's, and it's a straightforward match there, and there will be opportunities, hopefully. I remember Sergio Garcia to hit the first tee shot was the highlight of a otherwise poor Ryder Cup for me last time. that's what I'll be digging around for, because that's the stuff that interests me a bit more.
Yeah, fantastic. And so they had markets last time and who the captains were going to send out in their peers. That was one of the markets that was available.
Yeah, and believe it or not, I mean, not every bookmaker did it, but believe it or not, after the US had even started going out in their pods of 4, you could bet sort of 5-1 on Morikawa and DJ playing together, which, at best was a 2-1 chance at that point, given that they're in the same pod. But look, that probably won't happen again. Funny, I've been on Sporting Life, the website I work for, putting out some tennis content this week on behalf of a very shrewd colleague. And this time last year, he previewed the Davis Cup and tipped Canada at 33-1, and they went on to win it, having brought in all their big guns for the final. And this time, bookmakers have not priced it up. So I think it'd probably be a case of once bitten, twice shy with the Ryder Cup pairings as well. But we live in hope. You never know.
Yeah, I mean, my first selection would be McIlroy Aberg. Just seems like a no-brainer pairing to go out, put him with the experience, nice correlating teams with the two. And if there was a market out there for that, I'd certainly be in there. Audience, you got Victor Perez with your first selection. Look, Perez didn't quite make the card for me. I can understand the appeal. He does look to be rounding into form. I know, Ben, that you're a little bit higher on him this week than I am. So I'm sure that you don't mind that selection on Perez this week.
Yeah, I mean, he's a little bit hard to get a handle on, but I don't mind that. Some players you have to accept that, and you get the sort of compensation being the bigger odds or the lower price on DraftKings. I think, for his upside, for someone who's won 3 very big events, the Dunhill link's okay. He was dueling it out with Matt Southgate in the final round there. It might not look on paper like a big deal, but it was a huge deal, and it's for very big money. Then he's won the KL Open. He beat Ryan Fox with a remarkable display of putting, I'm sure many people remember. And then this year, the biggest win of his career at Yas Links, when he saw off people like Min Woo Lee and Shane Lowry and Francesco Molinari. He can go and win tournaments like this. The flip side is he's been up and down. He had COVID in Northern Ireland 3 weeks ago, but hopefully he's fully recovered from that. He hit the ball really nicely in the Czech Republic. And I think the key thing that sort of drew me back to him was that his odds are inflated because he missed a cut at Cron, and he simply is a player who has not figured out that golf course yet, whether it's the altitude, whether it's the nature of the course. It might have something to do with the fact that he's occasionally a very poor chipper around those small greens, but whatever the reason, he doesn't play well there ever, and therefore why should it bother us that he didn't play well there a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I guess that in-depth knowledge that you possess really comes to its fore, because, Cranes is such a weird, quirky, specialist course that, if a player who isn't expected to play well doesn't play well there, well, we shouldn't really be that perturbed by it. And then, it looks like we're going to go for the audience with Shivanka Sharma, which again is another steal for the audience from who I would have taken for my team here. Look, Sharma kind of has this tendency across his entire career to either miss the cut or finish in the top 10. Like the upside that this guy possesses is absolutely insane. I thought the 8th at the Open Championship was incredibly impressive. 7th last week at the Irish Open, which, when he opened up his lead kind of after Thursday, Friday, we probably expected he could have gone the other way and just kept running away with it, and ended up with a pretty boring Irish Open, which we kind of got the opposite of. Nobody really wanted to win it come Sunday. And then he's got an excellent record here. I mean, he's had a 9th and a 17th here previously in 2021 and 2019, 13th in the Tiger as well in 2022 last year. So I don't mind that. But Sharma for me is like the ultimate play in your larger GPP contests of a golfer who can go out there, absolutely spike and finish in the top 10. And yes, he might miss the cut for you, but if you're in those larger contests, he could be somewhere where you're going to get some really high upside, which is certainly an aspect of his game that I like here.
Yeah, he's a super player, Shivanka. He's a lot younger than a lot of people would think as well, because he came out and won very quickly on the DP World Tour in Joburg, and then again in Malaysia. And he's still got a lot of good golf ahead of him. And as you say, he's produced it on courses like this. I mean, Sojourner actually, where he won in Malaysia, would be broadly similar, and probably Rand Park in Joburg as well. They're tree line golf courses where his accuracy off the tee counts or something. And he's got that the thing you mentioned that he sort of spikes, he's got that in sort of every element of his game, and particularly his irons and his putting. He can be the field leader in putting. He can be certainly one of the top 5 in approach play, and that's a really deadly blend, obviously. And there are players who just simply don't have those spike weeks, at least, not to the same scale as Sharma for a player so low down the rankings. So yeah, he's a nice player, a lot of time for him, and he's probably playing as well as he had for a few years.
Yep, absolutely agree. That's why I'm most upset at the audience for taking him from me, because I would have loved to have had him on my squad this week. Looking at where my selection now and looking where everyone's salary is kind of sitting, I'm thinking that I'm going to have to go to a range where I would have ideally have liked to have taken someone like a Perez perhaps, but I'll go up to a Ryan Fox at 8,100 for me. Third last week. I think he'll be bitterly disappointed he didn't come across the line in the Irish Open. I mean, as a fellow Kiwi, despite I have both Ryan Fox and Vincent Norman were my 2 shortest selections last week, and despite Vincent Norman being at the 45-1 higher odds, I would have loved to have seen Ryan Fox get across the line and win it, of course, where Michael Campbell, obviously a fellow Kiwi, won as well previously, but wasn't to be. He would have been disappointed to play the 2 par 5s at even par. But look, we know the level that Ryan Fox has been competing. He's currently outside the top 10 to automatically qualify for the PGA Tour. And I would suspect that, having spoken to him and interviewed him earlier this year, I know that that's where he wants to be playing. So he does really need to come out and perform at these events when there's so many points on offer. Yes, there's an element of pressure that comes with that. But, I think that Foxy's got the medal about him. He always seems so calm on the golf course. Very fast pace of play, likes to get out there and just kind of get up, hit the ball and see where the ball ends up lying. And then in terms of the comp courses, the second last year at Rinkfin obviously holds some correlation here. A lot of people won't know with Ryan as well that obviously he hits his 2 iron off the tee, loves to do so and loves to club down, and so not so worried about his driving accuracy here for me, although that might put some people off. What do you think of the fellow Kiwi there, Coley, with Ryan Fox?
Yeah, he's just so solid at this level now. He's one of the best players on the DP World Tour. I think he's more than good enough to go and hold his own in the States. So I hope he achieves that goal. He's played some really good golf this year, and not to keep repeating myself, but he is a player who, when you see someone like that, his first real foray to the States, finishing, I don't know, 25th at Colonial or whatever he was, that really impresses me. It wouldn't impress everybody, but I really do think form like that is of value. And actually, it leads me nicely into my next pick, who's Thomas Dietrich at just $100 less. He was in the top 5 here last year. He was a bit unlucky to be disqualified, I think, the year before. He comes in on some of those comparisons. So Soudal Open, he probably will look back and feel like he should have done better. He certainly should have done better. He might feel he should have won that earlier this year. He's had a really good year in the States. He played really nicely for the most part last week. Struggled a little bit on Sunday, but he was in and around the places for most of it. Drove the ball really well. He gained strokes through the bag on the PGA Tour as a rookie this season. Comfortably kept hold of his playing rights for next year. And I know he gets a hard time for not having won yet, and I do get that. And events like those which took place in Belgium earlier this year are hard to justify, but he's been a bit unlucky at times as well, certainly when he lost out in a playoff in Scotland to Minwoo Lee. So, Thomas Dietrich, a player who is still getting better, and I think will continue to do so for a good while yet.
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of the ones who's been burned by Dietrich, particularly I think it was the Punta Cana earlier this year where he probably should have gone and won and was within my selections, and again just came out with a Sunday round. I think he shot even par in the final round on a very easy course that he really should have gone out and dominated. And that is the struggle for me with Dietrich. And look, when you get situations like that though, once people start getting burned by someone like Thomas Dietrich, then they want to start excluding them. We as humans psychologically want to avoid pain, right? So we want to avoid someone who's going to let us down, and that can create leverage and that can create opportunities. We know where the upside of Thomas Dietrich should be. I do suspect he will get out there and win a tournament at some point of his career. He's too talented not to. And yeah, look, I can't complain about the pick at all. And 2 final picks for yourself, got 7,450 on average. What would you like to go with your second to last selection here?
So I'm going to go Eddie Pepperell here. A player who's a couple of top 10s at Wentworth. He really loves the course. I sometimes have a little chat with his brother. I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying. And I messaged him a few weeks ago when I was keen on Eddie at Galgorm Castle, where he played really well. Whether I can't remember, I think he was second in the end, but he was certainly a distant second or third, about 45 to 1, whatever he was. There have been some really good signs lately. I mean, at his best, he's one of the best iron players on the DP World Tour. His putting's improved. A bit like Julian Brum we were discussing earlier, his weakness is off the tee. Most of the time, he doesn't take a driver out onto the course with him, which in the modern era of sort of data-powered golf is very, very rare. But he likes to take a 2-wood in effect and a different 3-wood, and he messes around with things. But I messaged his brother after, they tweeted that he played really well in a practice round together. And he said, look, he's working on his own at the moment. He doesn't have a coach, but he really feels like he's got back the old feels that he had when he was winning the British Masters, say, 5 years ago, and when he was contending for the Players' Championship as well. Let's not forget when he was in the top 10 of the Open at Carnoustie. And I think there are loads of signs that Eddie's back on track. He's motivated again. He's really enjoying his golf. And he rises to the occasion in events like this. And I just think that miscut last week is nice because it kind of puts people off. And I think that the underlying strength of his game remains. And Wentworth is a really good place to show that because, as I said before, he doesn't have to pack that driver. He's not one who's going to go for the 17th and 2. He might not go for 18 and 2 all that often. But he can still score here because there are a lot of holes where if you put it in play off the tee, you're hitting 7, 8, 9 iron, and that is his bread and butter. So Eddie Pepperell, I think, have a good week. Yeah,
and I was one of the ones who put up Eddie Pepperell last week. He actually made our DFS score and broke our hearts by finishing his last 6 holes in 3 over, I think it was, to miss the cut on the number, which was incredibly disappointing. And look, I mean, we need Eddie Pepperell's tweeting, was Byron said last week, when Eddie Pepperell's tweeting, he's playing good golf. And we've been seeing a few battles with him with Lee Westwood lately on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it, the website formerly known as Twitter. So, yeah, look, I do love the upside with Eddie Pepperell. I do suspect he comes out and wins one of these big tournaments at some point. For me, the quality is there. That's why I put him up at the Irish Open, because it looked like a course that was really actually going to suit him quite well. He would have been disappointed to have missed the weekend there, because I do think he could have gone very deep into the tournament. But yeah, look, by all means, it's a course where he's played very well previously, in 6 in 2020. And as you mentioned, it was a 3rd at Galgorm earlier this year. So for me, I'm going to go and take one of the WinDaily Sports crowd's audience favorites. And if we're talking about high ceiling and absolutely low bottom floor, no one else comes to mind more than Guido Migliozzi at 7,700. For me, I'll kind of put him in there instead of Sharma as my guy who can either go out there and finish top 10 or completely miss the cut and ruin this team completely for me. But he's looked a lot closer, Guido, of late, and I love the ball striking that we get with him. We saw at the French Open, obviously, a victory there for him there last year as well. And as you mentioned, it's not necessarily the worst course that we could look at in terms of correlating form for the Italian.
Yeah, I love Guido this week. I think, rounds of 63 and 61 at Cron a couple of weeks ago, really eye-catching. And, he's got his title defence coming up, as you say, and, he'll be geared up to do himself justice in France. And I think he's playing very similarly to how he was playing before he won that tournament last year. Whether or not he can produce the shot he produced to win it again, to do it here, I don't know. But he's definitely a player with, big titles like this in him. I think he's probably one of those rare golfers who gets better the more it matters, and that's a real quality.
Yeah, and interesting as well with Migliozzi. I guess after the French Open, he almost entered the realm of Ryder Cup chat, and I guess it would have been nice to have had an Italian on the team. And I wonder as well, with those selections now being done, and I think he would have well known by this latter stage that he wasn't going to make the squad. But now that team has kind of formed, that pressure's completely removed. He can go out and play a bit freer. And I suspect we almost saw that a little bit at Crans in terms of those 61s and 63s that you mentioned. He has got the ability to just go incredibly low. And for me, it's a course that should really suit him. Yes, he's going to make some bogeys, but God, he can make some birdies when he's on form as well. So, audience, you are on the clock. And what have we got here? We went... Kawamura, I think, was the first selection, if I'm not mistaken. Got a double. I don't mind Masahiro Kawamura at all. I think that he's got some incredible upside. He's played very well at other driving accuracy courses like Mataiga. He's got a very good record there. We obviously were on him recently at Crans at 250 to 1, I think, and he finished 8th for us. Unfortunately, just spoiled the party a little bit with the share of the place payout, but very juicy top 40 and top 20 markets. So that's the first one there. And if someone in the audience can let me know, might be Fitzpatrick, it looks like, but let me put Kawamura in there, and we'll make sure that you guys are staying below your salary cap, because you're going to be leaving a lot of salary on the table, audience. So I'll give you a final chance on Fitzpatrick there, whether you want to leave at $1,400 odd on the table if you want to come back up to the $9,000 range. Thank you, Seb. It was Alex Fitzpatrick. Look, if we don't get any other names sort of in the next minute, we'll stick with that as your selection. But it does look like you'll end up leaving a lot of money on the table. So I'll give you kind of a minute. But what's your take on Kawamura while we give the audience a second chance here, Ben, on spending the rest of their salary?
Yeah, he's got a nice record here. He's really strong off the tee, not because he's long, but because he's accurate generally. He's a nice player, and he tended to be one of those who swings wildly from good form to bad, but can hold on to some good form when he finds it. You'll often see him produce those batches of, say, 4 top 20s in 5 or 6 starts and then go very, very cold for a while. His long game numbers can fall off a cliff, and yet he somehow brings them back. So he's one of those players. I'm a little bit surprised he's not won a small event by now. Perhaps he will, probably next year in the spring, events like the Indian Open or whatever. But yeah, he's a nice player, and he's got a good record at Wentworth.
Yes, he does. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you can sort of discount that first start miscut as a sighter, and obviously he was quite a different golfer there. But since then, he's had 3 starts for 3 top 20, so obviously has some liking to the place. And very generous of myself to allow the audience to retake their pick here. But Adrian Meronk, I think, is a much better shot this week than Alex Fitzpatrick. And that's not necessarily a knock against Alex Fitzpatrick. It's just that Adrian Meronk is obviously a better golfer. And you're using quite a bit more of your salary there. So audience, you're welcome. I am here for you, despite being against you on this week. You know that I've always got your backs. Adrian Meronk this week, any thoughts there, Ben? What do you like his chances?
I'd just be a little bit worried that it's another trip to the well, if you like. He's played the last 4 events, and would this be 4 in a row, wouldn't it? And it's high intensity. I know, look, they're not traveling all that far across Europe, and he's a relatively young man, and it's probably an excuse he wouldn't make for himself. But it's a big mental thing, I think, to defend the Irish Open and face those questions. And he was very emotional about it, as you perhaps expect him to be. So he didn't particularly interest me this week, but he's clearly a highly talented golfer, and if he goes and wins this, then I'll be the first to look back and say, yeah, he had all the incentive in the world to go out and prove a point. And actually, it's probably Luke Donald's worst nightmare, isn't it? Someone like him. I mean, if Vincent Norman wins again, I don't think Donald will be that pleased about it, because it just sort of raises that question of, should we be picking our team that far in advance? But yeah, loads of time for Adrian. I hope he does get his day in the Ryder Cup in a few years.
Yeah, I suspect he does. I mean, and what an achievement that will be for him. Obviously, be the first Polish player to make the Ryder Cup squad. Yeah, and look, I tend to agree. It's been a long season for him. I wonder if he's, it's always hard to you enter the realms of speculation when you're looking at the motivation of players, right? And it's always hard to determine, is Adrian Rock going to come out like really fired up and like wanting to prove a point against Luke Donald, or is he going to be disheartened and really just, kind of, take a back seat, as it were. So very difficult on those kind of calls to make. But look, Adrian Ronk's certainly got the talent in my eyes to go and win a tournament like this. I wonder if it's a little bit early, just given the caliber of the field. But certainly I like putting Adrian Ronk in the audience team there a lot more than putting Alex Fitzpatrick. So I do think that's the better of the two. For me, I'm going to leave a little bit of salary on the table as well. I was in between a couple choices here. I don't think that Loughton's the worst selection. My concern really just comes because his chipping has just been so dreadful, and I know that you're going to need to scramble here. I guess that's where that concern comes in for me with him. So I'm actually going to leave a little bit of salary on the table. I'm going to take Connor Syme at 7,600 with my last selection. I don't necessarily think it's the best course fit for him, but his approach play is just so on form at the moment. His last 3 tournaments have been pretty phenomenal, 3 top 10s, and just looks to be absolutely striping it. I mean, gaining sort of in the realm of 6 to 8 strokes on approach in his last 3 tournaments. 7th last week at the Irish Open, 3rd at Crans-sur-Sierre, and then 4th around Galgorm as well. So again, he's never really... he's played this once. He made the cut, lost a ton of strokes putting. We're not going to know that much about him liking or disliking this course from that. But for the form that he's in, I just think I can't ignore him at 7,600 and would rather go there than perhaps a Rosner or a Loughton for me.
Yeah, he's red hot, isn't he? And there are a lot of golfers in that sort of price range, which is obviously the bracket I'm looking at as well, who do have a bit of a form question to answer, and he certainly doesn't. He's absolutely at the top of his game. He's got loads of good form on sort of tree line courses. I think probably Diamond in Austria is the one that really springs to mind as one where he's been really effective. So I would have been looking at him, but I'm going to go with Matthew Southgate for the final pick. He is 7,400. He's been one of the most reliable tee to green players on the DP World Tour this year. He's been around a long time, Matthew, but I think he's probably playing some of the best golf of his life. I like the fact we're in England. I think he really is a player who has produced a lot of his best golf in UK and Ireland. Obviously, at the K Club back in 2016, when he was second to Victor Perez in the Dunhill Links, when he was in the top 12 a couple of times in the Open Championship. And although Wentworth's not always been kind to him, he seems to be getting better with every visit. And he was 13th last year after a couple of 67s in what proved to be the final 2 rounds. The one thing I really like about him in terms of, if they were playing some low-key events over the next month or so, I think he'd be one I'd be going back in on quite regularly, because for a while he had a real weakness around the greens and he seems to have sorted it. And it's not a historic weak. Just for about a year, it was a real problem. And actually, if you go back when he was coming out on tour, his short game was well talked about. But he's found it now. Again, he's gaining strokes in that department. And we know that he's going to gain strokes with his ball striking. He's putting a little bit better. I mean, he's doing everything well. Probably not quite as explosive as Connor Syme lately, but apart from Cron, which he doesn't particularly enjoy, he's been, 23rd in the Open, 9th at Galgorm Castle, 23rd last week, getting better as the week progressed. He was 10th in Denmark. He loves Rinkven, where they play the Sudal Open. He was top 5 there in the spring, and played really well in the Belgian knockout there. So yeah, with his short game coming around, and I do think Matthew Southgate's one of those players who gets a bit better in these bigger events. And I think, winning's probably beyond him, but making the cut and playing well and finishing 25th, 30th is probably not. So he looks a good option.
Yeah, I mean, Southgate is perennially a favourite of mine, particularly on some of those link style courses. The links form is always very, very strong for Southgate, and perhaps on the Parkland course I would have avoided him here, but I think you've made a really compelling case for his situation entering the tournament here. And ladies and gentlemen, those are your lineups. So take one final look at them as I bring the draft board down. And I didn't actually mention to Ben before we started the show that we like to end the show with some first round leader picks. So Ben, I don't know if you like to enter the first round leader market or if you want to throw some names out there. But while you have a little bit of a look, I can go and give my two selections for first round leader. And the only reason I'm putting out two is because they're both pretty short. They're Tommy Fleetwood for me at 22-1 going off in the morning, and then Tom Kim as well at 33-1. I like both of them going off in the morning. I think that that's going to be the better weather wave. Lighter winds, obviously, and hopefully a little bit softer with some dew in the morning. I understand it's still pretty fresh and cold over in the UK, despite being at the tail end of summer. But look, both of those players have a history of going out there and shooting low, especially in the first round. Both can get very hot with the putter, and for me, I'd rather go those two selections than a smattering of longer priced ones as well. So, Ben, if you haven't got any first round leaders, I've kind of thrown you in the lurch and there at the last minute. So if you don't have any first round leaders, would love to hear from you in terms of any other selections that you like on the board this week from the markets.
All I say with the first round lead is obviously here. One thing to remember is they do all go off the first tee, so it's an elongated draw in effect. So yeah, they're teeing off throughout the morning, and maybe that's an interesting dynamic. The other thing to say is often it is a very, very good player. It's got, sort of self-evident, I suppose, but there are some events where you feel like you might get a big price first round leader. This one, it doesn't happen all that often. It does happen, but I think last year was it Tommy and Victor with the first round leaders. I don't know if there was another person up there with them. So no, it's probably not one I've had a good look at. The one thing I would keep an eye on is Jamie Donaldson at a really big price to maybe sneak in the frame. He's out early. He could have won this tournament 2 years ago. And if we go back to the Belfry in the spring, which, as we've both mentioned, is a pretty good guide to this, he was bang there after day one. I think, in fact, he was probably second to Justin Rose after day one. I remember it so vividly because I tipped him at a massive price as well as Justin Rose. And from that point onwards, then things didn't go to plan, but they certainly did on Thursday. Maybe he can produce a low round. But ultimately, I think probably focusing on the bigger names who are out early is the right thing to do.
Fantastic. Well, you can get Donaldson as high as 600-1 if you're in the UK on FanDuel for a first round leader, or 500-1 for Unibet. I can see out there as well for overseas bookmakers. So that will certainly be juicy. However, yeah, top of the board for me, I'm going to go Tommy Fleetwood and Tom Kim with my two selections. Mr. Ben Coley, I realise that it's extremely late there over in the UK, truly international this week because it's early morning or sort of 10:15 now in New Zealand. So, look, I just so appreciate you coming on the show. It's been absolutely wonderful to hear your insights and to get to speak to him person rather than endless kind of Twitter conversations about various golfers and murmurings about the world of golf. But look, it's been an absolute pleasure. And if you're not following Ben, you can find him on Twitter at Ben Coley Golf and on Sporting Life. I just highly recommend you go out them. For me, he is the absolute best golf tipster that you can find. And the best thing is that all his articles are absolutely free to go and read. So do please go out and support him because his page is absolutely on fire and his selections are incredibly sharp. Ben, any final thoughts before we end the show here?
No, only to say thank you for that. Very, very generous, and it's been a real pleasure to speak to you as well, and to do something a bit different because I don't write about DraftKings. I've played it many times in the past, but it's not necessarily my forte or something I often get to talk about. So that was a lot of fun doing the snake draft there, and you've got a good show here. So no, it's been fun to be on. My wife might kill me, but other than that, it's all good. I'm going to get the dog to bed. I'm going to go to bed, and we're 36 hours here from the start of one of my favorite tournaments of the year. So all good fun.
Yep, fantastic, and that's very, very nice to hear. And I hope that your wife does not give you too much trouble because when it comes to the PGA Draft Cast, there's one thing that we love, and that is